I would like to start this message with a passage of history recorded in John chapter 11, where Jesus is out and about ministering one day when all of a sudden a messenger comes with a message to say, "Jesus, come quickly, your best friend Lazarus, he lay deathly ill." In other words, if you come now, you might be able to save him, cause a miracle to happen, heal him. But Jesus responds in a very interesting way. He says, I'm busy here. Like this, it won't end in death. Rather, it's going to be for the glory of God. And Jesus just keeps on doing what he's doing. A little while later, Jesus comes to his disciples and says, "You know what? Been thinking about it. I might go back now to Judea where my friend Lazarus is because he's fallen asleep and I think I'm going to go and wake him up." But the disciples are like, "Whoa, time out, Jesus. This is a bad idea. Don't you remember what happened the last time we were there? They tried to kill us. Going back there is like almost certain death. And besides, if your friend has fallen asleep, that's how sick people get better. Let him sleep." And then Jesus clarifies it for them and says, No, you don't understand. He's dead. And I'm going to wake him up. And besides, aren't there like 12 hours of light in a day? It's when you walk at night that you stumble. In other words, if you hang with me, I'm the light of the world. We're going to be okay. And then one guy by the name of Thomas, otherwise referred to as Doubting Thomas, becomes momentarily Courageous Thomas as he says, all right. If you insist on going back there, then why don't we all go with you there and die with you there? They eventually get to the outskirts of the town, and Martha, the sister of Lazarus, she sees that Jesus has come, and so she quickly goes up to him and she's like, Jesus, like, where were you? Didn't you get my message? Why didn't you come? I sent you a DM on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and Jesus, if only you would have come. My brother would be okay, but now it's too late. He's dead. And Jesus, he looks at the broken state of this woman and says, "But Martha, don't you believe in the resurrection?" To which Martha says, yeah, sure. Like, all right, yeah, I know. Like one day he'll be resurrected. To which Jesus says, No. You don't understand, Martha. I am the resurrection. Mary, the other sister of Lazarus, she also hears that Jesus has come to town. She's been mourning with a group of people. She quickly gets up, hurries over. She pretty much says the same thing to Jesus, like, Jesus, where were you? Why didn't you come? But this time she is so broken and weeping with the people that she's mourning. And Jesus this time responds in a very different way. And he looks at her and her broken state. And then, shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept. Now, over the years, I've heard it argued various different explanations as to why Jesus wept, ranging from he was so moved with compassion for the broken state and the plight of the people, all the way through he was ticked off. Like, what's wrong with you people? Don't you know who I am and what I can do? Like, how long do I have to stay with you people? But the point is, it doesn't really matter why Jesus wept. What matters is that Jesus wept, that he was moved to emotion, and then says, okay, take me to where my best friend Lazarus lay buried. And they take him to a place where the tomb is. It's a cave, and it has a large stone that's been rolled in front of the cave. And interestingly, Jesus gives an instruction to the people, I want you to roll the stone away. Martha pipes up and says, whoa, once again, time out, Jesus. That is a bad idea. You don't understand. My brother, he's been dead for 4 days. In other words, he stinks. That is not the last memory I want of my brother. But Jesus insists. He says, no, I want you to roll away the stone. My question is, why? Because Jesus could have done it completely differently. Jesus could have just said, all right, stand back everyone, and then with lightning bolts out of his eyes, blast the rock and out comes a dead man walking. I mean, that would have been cool, right? That would have been much better for Hollywood to make. But instead, Jesus says, no, you do what you can do before I do what only I can do. When it comes to rolling away the stone in our lives, what does that practically mean? All too often, when we are hurt, hard done by, we've been betrayed or abandoned, or we are the recipient of something called high treason, all too often, it is such a devastating experience that we never want to go through that again. And so what we do is we tend to build a wall or roll a stone over our heart so as to protect us from being hurt again in the future. But unfortunately, if we are asking God for healing of our heart, God says, all right, just give me access to it. Roll away the stone and allow me to come in as the master surgeon and do heart surgery on you. So when it comes to rolling away the stone off of across our heart, what we're talking about here is what's otherwise referred to as forgiveness and reconciliation. Now, it's important to state right from the outset that forgiveness and reconciliation go hand in hand. It's like the surname, if you will. It's like conflict has a surname, it's called resolution. Conflict, if you've got conflict, well, don't just stay there, go for the resolution. And the same is true with forgiveness. If you are going to engage in forgiveness, it works hand in hand with reconciliation. But reconciliation is not restoration. Reconciliation precedes restoration. They are not the same thing. It's important to note that reconciliation is not based on conduct, but rather it's based on our conviction. We don't wait for a person's behavior to change before we are willing to engage in forgiveness and reconciliation of that relationship. We might be looking for a change of heart, but we're not looking for a change of behavior. Think of reconciliation a little bit like salvation. Our salvation, it's not based on our good works, but rather the moment that we commit to follow the Son, to repent of our sins and accept his invitation to be in relationship with him, the moment that we confess by faith that he is Lord and we believe this in our hearts, that is the moment that reconciliation takes place. That we are restored to God the Father. And now that we are reconciled to him, now the restoration process begins. So in other words, when it comes to church, we can come as we are. We don't have to have it all together. All we have to have is a change of heart to surrender to God. God, accept me who I am. God says, I will. Let's engage in a relationship. Let's reconcile this broken or damaged relationship. And now that you came as you are, you won't stay as you are. Now we embark upon the journey of restoration. This is exactly what happened with Lazarus. It's important to note that Jesus says to the mouth of the cave, once the stone has been rolled away, Lazarus, come out of there. And Lazarus emerges from the cave or from the tomb, and he's got all of these bandages and grave clothes on him, and Jesus makes the declaration, take those bandages and those grave clothes off and let him go his way. Please note, the restoration of the man came after the reconciliation or the revival of his life. There's a process at play. And it's a little bit like forgiveness. It's also a little bit like a wound that you might receive. You can receive a gash in your leg and you can go off to the doctor and the doctor will look at that thing and go, ooh, that's nasty. We're gonna have to clean that out, stitch it up, and then they put a dressing on it. And as soon as that process is complete, they send you home. In other words, treatment takes place in an instant, but healing often takes place over time. And the same is true with forgiveness. We can say, I forgive you. But that doesn't mean that all of your pain has gone away. Healing often takes place over time. We can enter into reconciliation with a person, but that doesn't mean that the relationship has been restored. That might take time and counseling. Think of it like this. Forgiveness is like the key that unlocks the door. Reconciliation is pulling on the handle to open the door, but restoration is walking through the door into a brand new future. In the exact same way that reconciliation takes place the moment that we forgive and we open up the door to the possibility of restoration, I think about this concept in terms of traveling. Now, I've come a long way to be with you here today, and I, for one, thank God that the world has opened up and we can fly on airplanes once again. And I don't know if you're a little bit like me, but I'm sure I've told you in the past, I hate checking in luggage. You have to stand there in line for so long, and then you eventually put your bags under, you arrive at the other end, and you wait at the carousel forever and a day, and half the times your bags don't even arrive. So when I travel, I like to travel with hand luggage only. And it's so convenient when I board the airplane, I just go ahead and take a seat on and I put on my lap all of my baggage, my stuff, and it's so convenient because I've got my latest book that I'm reading, Keeping Hope Alive by Pastor Andre. It's a good book to read when you're flying on an airplane. I hope the plane will stay in the air. And I got my iPad, I got my phone, I got my reading glasses, I got everything. It's just so handy. But inevitably, you know what's going to happen next. The hostess or the stewardess or the steward or the flight attendant will come and they will say to you, "Oh, I'm sorry, sir, but you're going to have to stow your baggage, either under the seat in front of you or in the overhead locker." And whenever that's spoken to me, I like to say, "Oh, no, it's okay. I don't mind my stuff being here." It's, as I said before, it's so convenient. And look, it's not disturbing anybody else. So, thanks, but no thanks. To which, interestingly, the octave in the flight attendant's voice starts to change as they say to me, "I'm sorry, sir, I don't think you seem to understand because the plane cannot take off until you have dealt with your baggage." And I would suggest, what a great metaphor for life. If you want your life to take off in 2022, if you want to start to rebuild, maybe it's time that we dealt with our baggage. When it comes to the baggage that we have, there was a recent study conducted where they asked both men and women, what was the most excruciating form of pain that you've ever been through? And to the researchers' surprise, the answers were not as expected. For example, among women, the greatest form of pain was not reported to be childbirth. And among men, the greatest form of pain was not chest waxing. But among both men and women, the greatest form of pain was reported to be heartbreak. And the greatest form of heartbreak was referred to as betrayal. Because betrayal doesn't come from somebody out there somewhere. It comes from somebody who's close enough to knife you in the back. And look, the people in the Bible, they were no strangers to this, and neither are we. In fact, the only qualification that you need in order to experience this hurt, this hardship, is simply to be born. And when we peel through the scriptures, the pages of the Bible, we see that Abel was betrayed by his brother Cain. Samson was betrayed by the love of his life, Delilah. Uriah was betrayed by King David. Joseph was betrayed by his brothers. Daniel was betrayed by the government colleagues. David himself was betrayed by his son Absalom, and even Jesus was betrayed by the intimacy of a kiss with the one that he broke bread with. No one is immune to this stuff. So the question is, when it transpires, what do we do about it? Now, when it comes to forgiveness and reconciliation, let me just be clear for a second. In an audience of this size, there'll be people who are struggling, who are hurting, and this topic, it can touch a nerve, and we can feel sometimes a little bit defensive, and you might be thinking, you have no idea what I've been through. And you would be right, I don't know But I thank God that he knows, and he's got a way if you're willing to go that way. When it comes to forgiveness, I am so surprised as to how misunderstood this topic is. It's such a central theme to the gospel message, and yet I travel the world, I go to different churches, and I listen sometimes with head half cocked, and I'm like, what are we talking about? So in the short time that we have today, what I'd like to do is unpack with you 4 things that forgiveness and reconciliation is, but also debunk some myths and explore 4 things that forgiveness is not. Are you ready to go? The first thing of what forgiveness is that forgiveness is a choice. It's a choice that we make to let go of the hurt, the pain, the bitterness, and the resentment that when we have been hurt, we typically like to hold on to. Now, not too close to us, a little bit, like 1 arm's length removed, but we hold on to it to let everybody know, you won't believe what I went through. We love to nurse, curse, and rehearse all of the bad things that happened in our lives. It's like we stub our toe and we're like, ooh, and we nurse our toe and then we curse the step that we stubbed it on. Then like an hour later, our friends come over to visit. We say, you won't believe what happened to me. And we rehearse that story. We love to tell people, but let me just be straight. If you are telling more than 3 people about your problems, you're not looking for help. You're looking for attention. We like to show everybody what's going on with outstretched arm. When we've worked over the years with child soldiers in various different troubled hotspots around the world, but particularly here in Africa, in Sudan and Congo and northern Uganda, I'm always fascinated when I ask the kids, what's the first thing you need to do if you get bitten by a snake? And the kids, they always say, go kill that snake. But in actual fact, killing the snake won't help you. It's an interesting observation that not a single person throughout history has ever actually died from a poisonous snake bite. Did you know that? Yeah, it's a fascinating fact. I should know, I come from Australia, the land of the most poisonous snakes in the world, the eastern taipan. But not a single person has ever died from the bite of an eastern taipan even. Because we don't die from the bite, we die from the poison that remains in our system. Unforgiveness is often referred to as like being drinking poison, but hoping that the other person dies. When it comes to this snake bite, killing the snake doesn't help us. The snake doesn't even care. The snake slithers off on their own merry way. Our number 1 responsibility is to deal with the venom that is now in our system, because if we do not do this, it will actively destroy our lives. Now, I don't know if you've noticed, but I've been standing here with outstretched arm now for a couple of minutes, and at the start, it was relatively light. It was just a bottle of water, but after a couple of minutes, my arm is paining me now. What's technically happening in my body is that my body is producing glucocorticoids, or more commonly referred to as cortisol, a stress hormone that goes to the edges of my muscles and turns itself into sugar to give me the energy that I need to sustain this stress in my life. But if I'm still standing here in 20 minutes time with outstretched arm, you will need to call the ambulance. Because this simple little act right here could quite literally send me into toxic shock and kill me. So number 1 of what forgiveness is forgiveness is simply making a choice to put it down and let it go. And I gotta say, there is this instant relief that comes the moment you put it down. But I gotta be honest at the same time and say, my arm is still paining me. Remember we said before, forgiveness takes place in an instant. The relief comes instantly. But healing often takes place over time. But for every minute that I don't go back and pick that thing up again, my arm, it gets better and better and better until I get to a place where I don't even feel or recognize the pain anymore. And that's what forgiveness is. It's making a daily choice. I'm not going to nurse, curse, and rehearse what transpired. This day, I'm going to immerse it in the love of Jesus. I'm going to reverse it and disperse it from my life. This is the day I'm no longer actively going to scratch the rash. In Africa, you have the most ferocious animal on planet Earth. It kills more people than any other animal, and it's called the blood-sucking mosquito. And I hate those things. And when those things are buzzing around, man, I want to bite that thing before it bites me. I've had malaria so many times, I hate those things. But whenever it comes in under the radar and then bites me and sucks my blood and injects some kind of other substance, it leaves a welt on my white skin. And then I just find myself scratching, and I'm not even aware until it's bleeding, and whoa, like it's really itchy now. And then I get my fingernail, I do the cross thing. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? If only I would have left it alone tomorrow, it'd be gone. But at some perverse level, it feels good to feel bad as we scratch and we itch and we exacerbate the pain. And when we do so, we only make things worse, which is why point number 2 of what forgiveness is forgiveness is a sacrifice. We have to let go of our right to scratch the rash. We have to let go of our right for our lust for revenge, because sometimes we say, I'll forgive them. Just as soon as they get hit by a bus. Because I want them to feel what I've been through. But point number 3 of what forgiveness is that I'm required to trust God for the justice. I have to surrender it over to Him. Romans chapter 12, verse 19 says, "Do not take revenge, my friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, 'It's mine to avenge. I will repay,' says the Lord." But sometimes God's view of justice is not quite the same as our view of justice. So as we sacrifice our right to take revenge and we surrender it over to God and we say, okay, God, I'm trusting you. Now you get them good, right? Like you sick it to them, like you squash them like a man. I'm trusting you, God. Justice is what I'm after. And then God comes along to that person and says, I'm going to have words with you. And then all of a sudden that person says, I know, I'm so sorry. And God's like, oh, what? You're sorry? All right, then, I forgive you. And we're like, what? God, no! Where's the justice? God's view of justice is not necessarily the same as our view of justice. And I thank God for that. Because if it was, where would we be today? We would be nailed to a tree like Jesus was, but Jesus, while we were still yet sinners, Christ died for us. You see, if you understand what forgiveness is, it speaks more about the gift giver than it does about the recipient. There's no strings attached when it comes to forgiveness. It's a free will choice that you get to make. And the same is true of God's forgiveness of us. He's not looking for some kind of performance or some kind of song and dance. He's looking for a change of heart, but he's not saying, all right, down on your knees. We're like, oh, yes, sorry, God, I'm so sorry. And God's like, no, I'm not buying it. Like, where's the emotion? Like, where's the tears? I'm like, oh, yes, I'm so sorry, God, I'm so sorry. I'm like, okay, there's tears, but where's the convulsion? I mean, like, because I saw the Gangnam Style. Like, if you could do that, then I'll forgive you. No. God's forgiveness of us speaks more about the kind of God that He is than it does about how sorry we might be in this moment or what kind of performance or song or dance we put on for Him. We were doing training, trauma rehabilitation on the border of southern Sudan one year, and one of our facilitators came and said, I think it's like this. It's like there was this raindrop. It was floating free in the sky, and one day the clouds grew dark and heavy. And all of a sudden the raindrop found itself falling out of the sky, and it hit the ground. It became infused with the dirt and was now called mud puddle. And as this guy's telling me the story, I'm like, where are you going with this? And he's like, well, don't you understand? The raindrop is now filthy dirty. And nothing can clean it. Even after the rain clouds go away, it's still dirty. And then it sees a dog and it says, dog, come lick me clean, but no amount of licking can clean it. And then it sees a bicycle, come splash through me, but no amount of splashing can clean it. But then as the sun comes back out, all of a sudden the raindrop finds itself being extracted from the mud puddle, returned to its former place of glory. Only through the power of the sun can you be restored to your former place of glory. And I'm like, oh, that right there is good. Because obviously, even though he's talking about the process of evaporation and the power of the sun in the sky, the same is true in our lives, that only by the power of the Son of God can we too be restored in relationship with God and give him glory. And lastly, of what forgiveness is that forgiveness is a gift that we give even if it's undeserved, or especially if it's undeserved. And we said before there's no strings attached, so let me just say something really controversial. That person doesn't even need to be sorry, and you can still forgive them. Because as we said before, if you understand what forgiveness is, it speaks more about the gift giver than it does about the recipient. Let me just break it down for you. That person doesn't even need to be alive anymore, and you can still give them the gift of forgiveness. Because it is not until you extend the gift of forgiveness that you discover the gift is really intended for you. But you might be sitting there thinking, I don't know about this. Like this is sacrilegious teaching. Like, did you say Dr. Robi? He's not even a real pastor, is he? I'm like, seriously, man, this is sacrilegious teaching because, of course, what it says in Luke chapter 17, verse 3, it says, take heed to yourself. If your brother sins against you, rebuke him. Don't you like the word rebuke? It sounds like nuke. Rebuke him. And if he repents, then forgive him. So, what do you have to say about that, Doc? To which I say, yeah, isn't it great that God helps us by articulating the process? But let's not misunderstand. The word rebuke means to communicate your stern disapproval. In other words, if somebody has offended you, caused some kind of injury, or something has taken place and you go, that's not okay, you need to speak up. This is an instruction of the Lord to you to voice your concern, to say, excuse me, but that's not okay. I won't stand for that. I won't tolerate that, because all too often what we do is go, how dare you say that? And then I internalize it and then I go talk to my friend. You won't believe what that person did. Speak up. Rebuke is to declare this is not okay. Stand up for yourself. And if they go, oh, I'm so sorry, well, then you should forgive them. But nowhere in the Bible does it say, but if they're not sorry, then go back to the nuke part. No, we are simply commissioned to forgive as we have been forgiven. So that's what forgiveness is. But now let's quickly debunk a couple of things of what forgiveness is not. And the first is that forgiveness is not making an excuse, or it's not excusing the behavior of the perpetrator. We're not saying to the child soldiers, well, you know, it was war and people do kill each other in wars, and okay, they killed your family, so all is fair in love and war. No, hang on. You kill my family? That is not okay. It doesn't matter what time of day it is. It doesn't matter what justification you have. It's not okay. I'm not excusing your behavior, and I'm not making excuses for you. I'm not saying, oh, you had a terrible childhood. You didn't have the love of your father, and that's why you're such an idiot today. No. I'm not saying that. I'm not making excuses. In fact, what you did is wrong. And that's what makes forgiveness so powerful, because you don't deserve this. It's not justifiable. And yet it's a gift that I get to extend to you all the same, irrespective of whether or not I feel like it. Number two of what forgiveness is not is that it doesn't require us to befriend the perpetrator. I don't know if your mum said to you what my mum said to me when I was growing up, but if I was ever in an altercation with a neighborhood friend, she'd say, all right, now shake hands, forgive, and be friends. But you don't have to befriend somebody in order to forgive them. Well, we're not saying to the children who have been rescued out of human trafficking, now go back and be friends with that human trafficker, because it's not until you're friends that you've truly forgiven. However, the power of forgiveness or the power of love is so great that it can even transform an enemy into a friend. I remember working at the World Vision Children of War Center in Gulu in northern Uganda one year, and we'd been doing a lot of teaching on forgiveness and reconciliation. And one day, a girl had been brought in. She was greatly injured. She'd been mutilated, her nose, her ears, her lips had been cut off, and they'd been cut off by a particular soldier, child soldier, who was forced to do it. She was out and about in the field, gardening with her friends, and the rebels came along and they killed her friends. But this girl was pregnant. And apparently it was a bad omen to kill a pregnant girl because it might affect your own fertility later on down the track. So instead of killing her, they just mutilated her. They brought her into the Children of War Center and she made a physical recovery. In other words, they treated the wounds, they weren't fatal wounds. However, she did now have a mental or an emotional wound because every time she would look in the mirror, she would be reminded of what transpired. But one day, the child soldier who committed these offenses to her, he also escaped from the rebel group and was brought into the same Children of War Center. And she's like, that's the guy who did this to me. What do you do in such a situation like that? The facilitators didn't know either, and so they asked her, what do you want us to do? And she said, well, you've been doing all this teaching on forgiveness and reconciliation. Maybe I could give that a go. And so they brought all of the children together, and in a ceremony, she stood up and she declared, I'm not going to allow what you did to me to hold me back in my life anymore. I'm not going to wish you ill or curse over you. I'm letting go of my hurt, my pain, my bitterness, my resentment towards you. I forgive you. And the facilitators are like, ooh, easy to say, but surely that's hard to actually follow through. So they kept a watch on this girl for the next several weeks. Eventually, she gave birth to her baby. And one day, the facilitator walked around the corner only to discover the girl and the perpetrator of her physical wounds playing together with the baby and taking photos with one another. The power of forgiveness is so great that it can even transform an enemy into a friend. However, it is not a precursor or a requirement in order for forgiveness to take place. But once again, you might be sitting there thinking, no, I disagree, I protest because of what it says in Romans chapter 12, verse 20 to 21. It says, on the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink, because in doing so, you're going to heap burning lumps of coal on his head. So do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. So once again, But I said, yeah, isn't it great that God goes ahead and says, love your enemies, but then articulates what love looks like? That love, interestingly, it's not described as a friendship, but rather an act of service. That when they don't deserve it, we get to honor them all the same, because as Christians, we don't honor people because they're honorable. We honor them because we are honorable. Point number 3 of what forgiveness is not is that forgiveness does not require you to continue being abused by the perpetrator. I was in the Congo one year doing trauma rehabilitation training with 2 different rival tribes who months earlier had been killing each other, and we were talking about forgiveness and reconciliation. And after the training, one gentleman came up to me. He was a pastor of a church, and he said, I think I've been teaching it wrong. You see, there was this lady in my congregation. She came to me and she said, Pastor, my husband is beating me. How many times do I have to forgive him? I said to her, the Bible says 70 times 7. So go home, start counting. I'm like, what? Look, here's the deal. You are the apple of God's eye. He loves you. He does not require you to continue being abused in order for you to forgive a person. If you are in harm's way, get out of harm's way. But as you do, word of warning. Don't get out of harm's way and go, well, I'm going to go retreat in the cave and roll the stone in front of my heart so that I can't be hurt again. Now I'm safe. No. You get out of harm's way and allow God the space to do the work on that individual. And if there's a change of heart, well, what can follow is not just reconciliation, but the potential for restoration. In other words, we have to leave the door open. As we said before, forgiveness is the key. Reconciliation is the door being opened. But you have to be willing to walk through that door to experience restoration. But if you close that door, well, there's no healing for you, because forgiveness is what brings about the healing in our lives. And lastly, the fourth and final thing of what forgiveness is not, and possibly the most controversial. So you up for a little bit of controversy? Nothing like Rivers Church for a bit of controversy, right? The last point of what forgiveness is not is that forgiveness does not require you to forget what happened. Sometimes we've got this colloquial saying that we throw around, forgive and forget. And if you haven't forgotten, you haven't truly forgiven. But let me just give it to you straight. You will always remember what transpired. Unless you get dementia one day, then maybe you're out. But what we need to do is understand that it's a part of your life story. But you might be sitting there thinking once again, right, that's it, I've had enough. After this service is over, I'm going to make a blog about this sacrilegious, unbiblical teaching, because of course, what it says in Hebrews chapter 8, verse 12. It says, God speaking, I will forgive their wickedness and remember their sins no more. So once again, Doc, how are you going to get out of that one? Well, simply by asking the question, what does that mean? You see, we have to understand the difference between this thing called forgetting, where I just no longer have the memory in my mind, and this thing all the way over here called remembering no more, which is an active, daily, conscious decision and choice, as well as a discipline. In fact, we said it right from the beginning. It's number one, it's making a choice to no longer nurse, curse, and rehearse. I'm not going to actively scratch the rash. I'm not going to remember what transpired today. I'm going to let it go. And please note, I'm just doing that for today. Tomorrow's got its own worries. Tomorrow I'm going to have to make that decision again for tomorrow, because what happens typically in forgiveness is it's a little bit like going to the gym. We've got this weight that's pressed against our chest, and it's so hard and difficult for us to bear that we go, all right, this is the day, God. Give me the courage and the strength, and we push it away. But interestingly, tomorrow, it comes straight back, and you're reminded and you're triggered again about what that person did, or that situation, or that government party, or whatever it might be. And now tomorrow, I have to make this decision again. Today, I'm going to push it away. But then the next day, it comes straight back again. And the next day, and the next day, and the next day. But after a while, you start to build condition until eventually you're able to get to a point where you put that bar down and let it go. Every day, a conscious daily choice to no longer pick it up and scratch the rash.